November means Thanksgiving. So in today's market update, I'm going to cover 5 of the top pressing questions that might just come up about housing at the Thanksgiving table.
I keep it real, I keep it real, I keep it real, just keep it real.
Hey, what's up guys? It's Sam Hartman. As always, I'm keeping it real estate here in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And today I'm covering a November market update. And November is got my favorite holiday, Thanksgiving. It's got all of the delicious food, all of the quality family time without any of the hassle and stress of having to buy presents for Christmas. So I love Thanksgiving. I love the time I get to spend with family. I really love the food. Shoot me a comment of what your favorite Thanksgiving dish is. I'm gonna go with green bean casserole, but let's be honest, I'm kind of like a KFC bowl eater when it comes to Thanksgiving. I just kind of put it all on the plate and eat it all at the same time. I just freaking love Thanksgiving. But that quality time with family can sometimes lead to contentious conversations and situations. I know being in real estate, I always get people asking, how's the business? How's the market? But I know there's a lot deeper questions and uncertainty in people's minds with the economy, with the election, with just how the state of housing has been since the housing crash of 2008, since COVID-19. There's been a lot of things weighing and pressing on the housing market. If you haven't asked me those questions, if you're afraid to ask me those questions, I'm gonna answer 5 of the top pressing questions today. But I also wanna make sure I'm answering your questions and putting at ease your fears as it pertains to the housing market, because my goal is to bring context and clarity to you as a consumer so that you can be confident when you make real estate decisions. So let's dive into these 5 questions. So number 1 is involving mortgage rates. When are mortgage rates gonna come down? Number 2, what will it take for prices to come lower? Number 3, if I wanna buy a house, am I even gonna be able to find the house that I want? Number 4, will the housing market pick up in 2025? And last but not least, I've been answering this question for years. When is the housing market gonna crash? All right, well, let's get into it, and let's start with, when are mortgage rates gonna come down? And this is probably one of the biggest factors that has been weighing on housing affordability. And so it's an important question to look at. It's an important factor that home buyers and a lot of home sellers are looking at. Because guess what? Home sellers are also home buyers. No one sells their house to then become homeless. So everyone's been paying attention to mortgage rates, and it's an important factor in housing affordability. So let's start off with one key fact. Mortgage rates have already come down. From their peak of about 8% in 2023, we got them down as low as 6% this year. But now with more volatility, with more economic data coming in that is showing some of these market indicators, they need to keep pressure on these interest rates, and they bumped back up closer to 7%. So what are those factors? Let's take a look. We've got a quote from Ralph McLaughlin, who's a senior economist with Realtor.com. And Ralph does a really good job summarizing some of the things that are key indicators, key things that the Fed is looking at in terms of their monetary policy. And he says, the trajectory of rates over the coming months will be largely dependent on 3 key factors. Number 1, performance of the labor market. Number 2, the outcome of the election. And number 3, any possible reemergence of inflationary pressure. While volatility has been the theme of mortgage rates over the past several months, we expect stability to reemerge towards the end of November and into early December. So this is great news. Stability is a good thing because the volatility has really made it challenging for buyers to budget and plan for their home purchases when interest rates are going from 8% to 7% to 6%, back to 7%. So getting some stability, getting a downward trend is going to be a really great indicator if we can start seeing those positive signs going into 2025. Now I say positive signs, but really what the Federal Reserve is looking at is really more negative things in the economy. And number 1 being is the jobs market. What is the jobs market doing? Is it expanding or is it recessing? And so really the reason it's been so volatile over these recent months is that the job market has been outperforming the expectations of the Fed. And so when it outperforms, when the jobs market is growing quicker than they expect or not shrinking as much as they hope that it shrinks, that indicates to them that they're misprojecting, they're reading things wrong, and that's keeping upward pressure on those interest rates. And so we really are expecting some weaker job data coming in. This last jobs report has not been a great indicator of where things stand because of the hurricanes and the flooding in the South and East Coast, as well as the election going on, really threw some volatility in there as well. So this last jobs report wasn't a great indicator. So we'll really be looking to the next jobs report to give us a better sign of if we're getting that weakening jobs data that we were expecting. Now, he also mentioned the election. Now, we now know that President Trump is now going to take office next year, and there was some indicators, there was some babble that a Trump election would actually be negative for interest rates because of some of his ideas with tariffs that might increase inflation and thus might need to keep upward pressure on interest rates. So much of that is just really going to depend on what types of policies he brings to the table, how quickly he brings them to the table, and how firm he is with those things. So that's yet to be seen, but that is kind of a general conversation topic with Trump winning the election that could be a negative indicator on whether interest rates come lower quicker or not. Obviously, inflation, getting inflation under control is really a huge target for the Federal Reserve. And they've been very clear, they want to get it down to under 2%. And we're not there yet. We're right now sitting around 2.7%. And so we see there that is still going to keep pressure on keeping rates high, not getting to a neutral policy in the Federal Reserve terms, but still keeping pressure on interest rates until we can get closer and see that downward trend in a stable environment as well. But even with all of these things happening and swirling, we are seeing positive projections going into 2025. And right here, I have a projection of 4 different expert entities showing that they expect interest rates to be down below 6% by the end of 2025. Now, again, so many factors can play into that. I think projecting interest rates is almost a fool's errand because we've seen so many projections get revised over recent years and months, really just chasing their tail, catching up with the data. So really follow the data. Is the job market weakening? Are wages coming lower? Really those are 2 good indicators because that means less money coming into the economy, and that means slower economic growth, means possibly closer to a recession, and the Fed, to keep us out of a recession, will then start to bring their monetary policy into a more either neutral environment or possibly even a stimulating environment that would bring interest rates even lower. What will it take for prices to come down? So we talked about interest rates, and interest rates is one key factor to housing affordability. Another factor are home prices. Obviously, the more prices rise, the less affordable a home may become to you. So when will home prices come down? Let's look at one of the biggest factors that is playing a role in prices rising, and that is supply and demand. And during COVID times, this was one of the biggest things I was talking to people about when they were so uncertain about the housing market, so unsure about what was happening in the world, and so many questions and uncertainty. What we are looking at here is a graph of builder output over the years, going back to 1970. And you can see the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s especially, we were overbuilding, or we were building substantially more homes than we have been over the last 15 years. You can see those 4 years leading up to the housing market crash, we really had some record production in new construction because builders were taking advantage of the demand of the fact that so many buyers could get easy access to financing to buy homes. So they were really pumping out the homes to supply that demand with. Well, then the housing crash happened, and guess what? So many people got foreclosed on, those homes now flooded the market. And those buyers no longer, whether they went through foreclosures or bankruptcies, could no longer buy homes. So demand really weakened in that time as well. And that's what started this 15-year trend of low construction numbers. And you gotta think, if a home was built 15 years ago, that home would be a prime resale house to hit the market. And guess what? A 15-year-old home costs a whole lot less than a 1-year-old home or a new construction home. So we really missed the boat. We really lost out on all of these potential years of supply because builders weren't building homes. Builders were not oversupplying the market. They weren't building homes to then sit on the market and not have buyers buy them. Let's be honest, builders aren't charities. They're running a business. They're there to make money. So builders were really responding to the market trends, and we actually saw a lot of builders go out of business during those years as well, because there just wasn't the demand for the new construction because of the flood of inventory of foreclosure homes. So this is 15 years of pent-up supply that never hit the market. So what happens now? Well, let's be honest, guys. You can't build homes fast enough to meet the demand of today. It takes time, it takes permitting, it takes construction. The cost of construction has gone up that now it's not nearly as affordable as it would have been 15 years ago. So these are all challenges that the market is facing and is playing a factor in the rise in prices over the last 15 years as well. So with that information in hand, what are experts projecting? Well, we are projecting more modest, but still home prices appreciating. We saw home prices appreciate 20+% during the COVID years, but now we're expecting a lower range closer to 3%. And if we average out all of these different forecasts, we're seeing an average of about 2.5%. Now, a quick caveat, these projections are taking into account the entire United States market as a whole, but every market is very unique. Every market is very different. Fort Wayne, Indiana today is not responding to the same market dynamics as certain markets, let's say in Florida or Texas, okay? So this is really important where when it comes to your housing decisions, not just to trust any of the national news headlines. You should have a local expert, a local partner that can explain this stuff to you and help you feel comfortable with taking next steps towards either a home buying or home selling decision. And I'm gonna touch on this graph real quick because this shows the foreclosure data during the housing market crash, and you can see how high this data was. And then right out here is where we're at today. So even though we've seen some foreclosure activity start to return to the market, it is such a substantially lower percentage, lower number. It's not a flood of foreclosures. So the market is really still truly absorbing those homes and buying those homes rather than in the post-housing market crash where those homes were sitting on the market for a long time and really building and adding to that inventory of homes as well. Will I be able to find a home if I move? This is a great question. Like I said before, home sellers are also home buyers. And this is one of the big reasons that inventory has remained restricted over the last few years was because home sellers haven't wanted to make a move if they didn't have to. They wanted to hang on to their low interest rate. They wanted to stay cozy with their low payments. But let's be honest, life does happen. We call it the 5 Ds of decision making when it comes to housing: diamonds, diapers, diplomas, death, and divorce. These are all big reasons that put either pain or pleasure into your life that result in people either desiring or starting to discuss making a move in the near future. So if you want to make a move, if you're thinking about making a move, is there a home out there for you? And so the quick answer to that is to talk about what's happening with inventory of homes. And you can see here, this is going back to 2017. These are kind of normalized market trends here. This is 2017 seasonality. So you see it peak in the summer, start to fall in the fall and winter. And then it peaks in the summer, falls in the fall and winter. And so 2017, 2018, 2019, these were more normal inventory markets. They did see a little bit of a reduction year over year, but then we get to 2020. And you remember what happened in 2020? COVID-19, boom, interest rates dropped. People were buying up the inventory of homes. The people that did have a home refinance grabbed that low interest rate and now they're staying put. So really the inventory dropped drastically in 2020, bottoming out in 2022. But ever since then, we've seen a little bit of a rise each year. And here we are pushing closer to getting back to some of those more normalized pre-pandemic markets of 2017, 2018, and 2019. So we're seeing inventory rise, we're seeing days on markets longer for listings, and we're seeing lower buyer demand. So what that tells me is that buyers actually can have have more negotiating power in today's market than maybe they would have in some of these previous years that we've recently experienced. So maybe you're not getting that super low interest rate in today's market right now, but you might be able to negotiate some pretty favorable terms for you if you find the right property. We're going to go back to Ralph McLaughlin with another quote about this inventory, where he says there were 29.2% more homes for sale on a typical day in October compared with the same time in 2023, marking the 12th consecutive month of annual inventory growth and the highest count since December of 2019. So there it is. We're getting closer to those pre-pandemic levels of inventory, where he says we hit a peak and got closer to December 2019 numbers. Will the housing market pick up in 2025? Now, personally, I think this question really correlates more to me and my real estate partners in lending and finance and title and other realtors, because it's been a bit of a sludge these last couple of years. We've actually had record low transactions in the real estate market. And a lot of economists, a lot of people in the industry, but also a lot of people just on the fringes that are watching the market will tell you that if transactions fall, then prices will fall as well. But we actually haven't seen that. We saw record low transactions in 2023 and 2024, but we still saw upward pressure on pricing. So what's going to happen in 2025? We are expecting transactions to rebound. This is on the back of the expectation of mortgage rates falling and hopefully bringing some of that demand back to the market. I think what's going to be a really interesting trend is to watch if the supply of homes for sale starts to drop as interest rates start to drop as well. Does the demand start to outpace the supply of homes in 2025 as we start getting lower interest rates? I think that could be a really interesting trend to watch, and I certainly am going to be paying attention and bringing that context to you as well. Final question, and I love answering this question, and I've been answering it for years. Is the housing market going to crash? I can't tell you how many young buyers I've come across whose parents have told them not to buy a house, or they said, don't buy a house for another 4 years. The market's going to crash. You're going to be able to buy something cheap. And it's hurt the market. It's hurt these buyers because now they're on the sidelines waiting. And prices have done nothing but appreciate 60% over the last 5 years. And they lost out on that opportunity. So allow me to answer this question one more time. And actually, that's a lie. I'm going to answer this question hundreds of more times. Is the housing market going to crash? And I'm first going to go back to this trend report that shows foreclosure data. You'll often see headlines that foreclosures are increasing. Well, here is the foreclosure data from 2008 to 2011. You can see how drastically red this part of the graph is. Now, here we are down here to today, all right? So you see a really low spot here, and that's after the pandemic where the government put in a moratorium of foreclosures. The fear was that once that moratorium lifted, there was going to be a flood of foreclosures because the government said, you can't foreclose on these people. They need a chance to get back on their feet. And people said, well, as soon as that lifts, these people aren't going to be able to make their payments. They're going to get flooded into the market as more foreclosures, and we're going to see another housing crash. We haven't seen it. We've seen a very small uptick, especially in the grand picture of where we were at in the housing market crash. So foreclosures are not expected to play much of a role in pricing or where prices are heading. Another concern for people in the market is what's happening with consumer debt. We've actually seen consumer debt hit record levels. But here is a graph that shows you that debt and color codes it to what kind of debt it is. And you can see the bulk of the debt is orange, which is mortgage debt. And mortgage debt tends to be good debt. And here's why. Because you're buying an asset that appreciates in value. So even though you're taking on debt, you're buying an asset that is appreciating. Now we have these other debts that have grown a little bit. Obviously, you have car loan debt that's gone up with mortgage rates. Credit card debt's gone up a little bit. Student loan debt has gone up a little bit with interest rates as well. And so here we are at these record levels, and people are concerned. They're saying, how can people afford their houses? How can we have this much debt? Well, here's how, and here's why. Because we might have $13.2 trillion in mortgage debt, but the real estate that is being leveraged with that debt is valued at $48.2 trillion. So that means the equity that homeowners have today across our country is $35.1 trillion in equity. Again, that's why I say a mortgage is good debt, because you're buying an asset that's appreciating in value. Now, if we had $13 trillion in car loan debt, that's more concerning. Those are assets that don't appreciate and actually pretty quickly depreciate. And so this is just showing why mortgage debt is good debt, why owning a home builds your wealth over time. And my last talking point on is the housing market going to crash is to show you that there's no right time to time the real estate market. Would it be great to buy low and sell high? Absolutely. But your life doesn't always dictate that. And we certainly don't always know when the bottom is and when the top is. So this graph actually shows you the importance not of timing the real estate market, but of your time in the real estate market. This graph shows us every decade, 1990s, 2000s, 2010s, and 2020s, how much appreciation you can get in owning a home over a decade. And you can see in the 1990s, the appreciation was over 30% for owning that home for the decade. In the 2000s, we saw 47%. So that's even taking into account the housing market crash. If you bought a home on January 1st of 2000 and you sold that home on December 31st of 2009, you actually made 47% appreciation on your home's value. Well, let's talk about 2010 because we still saw some of that negative depreciation from the housing crash in the 2010s as well. And again, if you bought a house in 2010 while prices were still depreciating, but you sold that house in 2019, your home appreciated 47%. Your home appreciated 44.7%. And that is through a housing crash, okay? So this is telling you it's not about timing the market. It's about the time you spend in the market. And guess what? During that 10-year period, all of these homeowners have had the asset of a home that appreciated in value, but they also had a home. They had a place to call home. They had a place to come home from work, to see their family. They had Christmases there, they had Thanksgivings there, they had birthdays there. They made all these memories in their home for that decade. And at the end of the decade, they got paid with the wonderful surprise of an amazing amount of appreciation in their asset. So is the housing market going to crash? I certainly don't think so. But let me even just play devil's advocate if it were to crash. Own that home for a decade and you'll be just fine. I guarantee it. So what are 3 things you need to know? 3 little tidbits you can talk about with that Uncle Bob or Uncle Joe or Aunt Susie who's just a doom and gloomer and negative about everything because they bought their house 30 years ago and it was easy peasy. Well, here's what they need to know. Mortgage rates are projected to get below 6% in 2025. This is great news because every 1% change in a mortgage rate affects your affordability by 10%. Although we've seen recent record lows with real estate transactions, we are expecting a rebound in 2025 from 4.6 million projected sales in 2004 to 5.2 million in 2006. This is showing an increase in buyer demand that is going to match the increase in inventory and should result in rising prices as well. And that is exactly the third point. Prices are projected to rise still in 2025, although more moderately, which in my opinion is a good thing because we do not need 10, 15, 20% price appreciation year over year. A moderate, modest improvement is still good news and is still going to build your wealth and equity over the years to come. All right, guys, so those are the 5 pressing questions. I want to answer your questions or the things that are coming up in your life about housing, or maybe you have a challenging relative that you know you're going to come across come Thanksgiving dinner. Let me know what the question is. I will put some context and data to that question and try to help answer it the best I can. Keep it real estate out there, guys, and happy Thanksgiving.
I keep it real. Just keep